Hi everyone, welcome to today's Meeting of the Minds webinar. We're going to discuss innovative approaches to solving the housing crisis, PPPs, tiny homes, and air rights. I'm Jessie Feller-Hahn, I'm the Executive Director of Meeting of the Minds. Some of you are new and some of you are old friends, so I'll just quickly go over who we are. We're a nonprofit based in San Francisco, California. We bring together thought leaders around urban sustainability, innovation, and technology solutions for cities. One of our programming is our annual summit in the fall each year, which this year it's in the San Francisco Bay Area, October 25 through 27. Quickly, a short survey will pop up. We're just going to ask everybody to choose the sector that best describes them, so we know who's on our survey, who's on our webinar today. A few housekeeping notes. Because of the large audience in attendance, everyone will remain muted throughout the program. We will have a Q&A the last 20 to 25 minutes of the hour. Please enter your questions into the questions panel to your right when you think of them, and we will answer them and do a Q&A with Patrick and Darin at the end of the last 25 minutes of the session. A PDF of today's slides will be available on the event page of today's webinar. We also have them available in the handout panel to your right at the bottom of your control panel. They're both available in PDF form. Lastly, we will have a survey at the end of the webinar. We greatly appreciate your feedback because we are always trying to improve these webinars. We've been doing them for about 4 years and they get better and better. So it looks like 40% of you are from the public sector, 33% from the private sector, no one from philanthropy. That's interesting. 12% defined as entrepreneurs, and 16% from the nonprofit sector. Good to know. That'll be helpful for Patrick and Darin for their presentation. So we have two presenters today. First, we'll have Patrick Kennedy, who's the owner of Panoramic Interests, the development firm that's been building housing, live workspace, and commercial property in the Bay Area since 1990. And second, we'll have Darin Dinsmore, who's the founder and CEO of Crowdbrite. He also advises leading smart cities across the globe on urban innovation, economic development, and comprehensive housing infrastructure solutions. Darin and Patrick have a interesting story of how they met and started this work. But first, we'll hear from Patrick. So Dave will give Patrick the controls, and Patrick, take it away.
Thank you, Jessica and Dave. My name is Patrick Kennedy. I've been developing high-density infill housing in the Bay Area since 1990. In front of you are some representative examples of buildings that Panoramic has done. We've done low-rise, mid-rise, and high-rise infill and mixed use in Berkeley and in San Francisco. I'd like today to talk about trends that I've seen in housing in the Bay Area, the market conditions that are resulting from those trends, and then what I think is a potential solution to provide more housing in an innovative way. The 4 trends that I've seen in the Bay Area are as follows. Number 1, delayed household formation. I think we all know that the millennial generation is probably the largest one in the United States now, and that they are not marrying, having families and moving to the suburbs and anywhere near the numbers that they used to. The average marriage age has gone from 22 to 28, and we're seeing much more movement to the cities with single people. In San Francisco alone, we have around 41% single-person households, and that demographic shift is a major influencer of the kind of housing that we're going to need. A second trend that we've seen, and that I've seen here in the Bay Area, is the reduction in the number of people that buy houses. Now, here in the Bay Area, there's a simple reason: it's ridiculously expensive. There's a lack of supply, and it's impossible to build. So there's a good reason for the shortage here. But other places, millennials are delaying or buying houses as well, because job situation is uncertain. Student debt is higher than it's ever been, and in any case, there are a lot more renters now than there used to be. A third trend that we're noticing is the reduction in the number of people that own cars. Obviously, in the age of Uber, at least in the cities, Uber, Zipcar, Lyft has made it very easy to not own a car. And in fact, here in San Francisco, I think the prevailing wisdom is it's better off not to have a car than to own a car. And this was an article that came out in the paper a couple months ago, showing you actually save money not owning a car and using Uber. The fourth trend that we've noticed is that millennials have far less stuff, or they're not acquiring as much stuff. And I think part of the reason is that with an iPhone, an iPad, and a computer, you've got as much entertainment as you could ever want in the world, and you don't have to have bookshelves and CD collections and other things. I think also there is a movement towards spending money on experiences as opposed to acquiring stuff. And here's an article that was in Business Insider just yesterday talking about Americans' propensity to spend more of their incomes for experiences. Now, all those things are going to affect the kind of housing that people want, or the kind of housing that people can afford. And on top of that, we have the market conditions here in the Bay Area, which are abysmal. And I think most people have read quite a bit about the incredible shortage of housing here in San Francisco. It's true also, though, in Seattle, Boston, New York, Chicago, and many other cities. I think the best example of the ridiculousness of the situation here in the Bay Area was a recent article in which a Airbnb owner of a house rented a tent for $900 a month in Mountain View. I think it's a good measure of the absurdity of the situation here. Now, the response. I think the response from the developers, the response from cities, the response from planners should be a combination of three things. And the first of these is we're going to have to go much denser. And a crucial component of providing more housing, in my opinion, is to embrace the car-free developments. To give you an idea of the densities that we're talking about, I'd like to show you a site that we developed 3 years ago in the Soma area of San Francisco. That's a 3,750 square foot site where we built 23 295 square foot studio micro apartments. That project is car-free, and it is 4 stories tall. It's low rise. It's got a modest backyard, very little in the way of public spaces, but it's a super dense project. And I think you can see how dense it is when you compare it to a high-rise that was also built at the same time here in San Francisco on Sutter Street. That was a 12-story building at 216 units an acre, and compare that to our 4-story micro apartment project, which clocked in at 266 units an acre. So when you embrace micro design, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, you can see the kind, micro design and car-free, you can see the kind of densities you get in even low-rise buildings. Another example of a very dense micro apartment project is one that we just finished this July, or I should say in July of 2015. My goodness, it's been a year actually. This was a 12-story, 160 unit project with 120 micro studios and 40 micro suites on a lot that was 9,000 square feet and change. It's a 12-story building, post-tension slab concrete. Comparing that same high-rise on Sutter Street, a conventional apartment building with a couple hundred units that clocked in at 216 units an acre, our micro apartment project at a high-rise version has 3.5 times the density at 756 units per acre. So you can see that we're getting 3.5 times, 4 times the density of a conventional apartment building. And the key reason we can do that is we do not have parking for any cars. A good example of what can be done on a smaller infill site is one that we're investigating in downtown San Francisco in the Tenderloin, which is at 200 height, and that is a 7,650 square foot corner site where we proposed that project there, which is 168 micropads. That's a dwelling that we are proposing to San Francisco for the homeless. And that 7,650 square foot sites can support 168 micropads, which are basically fully equipped residential hotel units in an 8-story building, which is not a high-rise. And if you calculate the density for that project, it's close to 1,000 units per acre. And I think it underscores the capacity that we have in our cities on relatively small lots to produce a lot of housing. A second tenet of how to produce, the second of the 3 tenets of how to produce more housing is the units need to be smaller, and I think they need to be better designs. One of my heroes happens to be Dieter Rams, who coined the phrase less but better. I'll talk a little bit more about this now. But an exemplar, in our opinion, of how to build smaller but livable units is the micropad, which we're now proposing for cities for homeless housing. This is prefab steel modular with units that are all 160 square feet. They take their inspiration from an unusual source, which happens to be the Citizen M hotel chain. This is one that's in New York City. There are ones in Amsterdam, Glasgow, London, and a couple other places. But the key feature of the Citizen M hotel rooms, or Citizen M hotel, which rent for between $170 and $400 a night, on the, depending on the season, is that all of the Citizen M hotel rooms are 160 square feet. There's the inside of one. They're stylish, tall ceilings, simple, but perfectly usable, and a very popular hotel. TripAdvisor rates the Citizen M Hotel in Times Square at 24, which is, I think, 12 spaces higher than the Ritz-Carlton that's on Central Park. Here you can see the footprint of the Citizen M hotel room at 160 square foot and the footprint of our micropad, which is essentially our studio apartment, and both are 160 square feet. Our micropad comes with a small bathroom with built-in shower with a shower curtain, tiny food preparation area, armoire, desks, chairs, a bed, and food prep area. I think I said that. A bench with a gear wall. But it's got everything a single person would need to live in the city, and a couple could live here too. The bed that's shown there is a full-size bed, but it could take a queen if needed. You could also take a bunk bed. There's a view of the interior of the micropad from the window looking in. As you can see, it's narrow, but it has tall ceilings, lots of natural light, great ventilation, incredible soundproofing, and can be built on a very large scale on sites varying from 2,000 square feet to 10,000 square feet. Here's the studio apartments that we just built in the Panoramic in San Francisco. These are 270 square feet, which I'm sure many people consider to be quite small, but which we found to be more than adequate for 1 or 2 people that have the ability to pay $2,000 or $2,500 a month for a studio. There's the interior of one of those micropads, 9-foot ceilings, lots of built-in furniture, excellent lighting, excellent ventilation. This particular studio has a table bed, which you can see in the rear there, that switches to a dining room table, or switches from a dining room table by day to a queen-size bed by night. There is our 2-bedroom apartment, which is has a living room, kitchen, bath, 2 bedrooms, and is designed to be built in a modular fashion. The width of each one of those rooms is 8 feet, and each component can be put together. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We do happen to have an actual model, real live model of this at our offices in San Francisco. If anyone happens to be in the city and would like to see what a 2-bedroom, 425 square foot apartment is like, but we have found it to be more than adequate, as have many of the people that have toured it. Essentially, we've tried to provide the absolute minimum amount of space to satisfactorily satisfy the needs of an urban dweller. That's what the 2-bedroom looks like in isometric view, and that's what it looks like in elevation. It's got a clean, simple, light, modernist vibe, as you can see, and lots of storage, excellent internet, great soundproofing, and pretty indestructible design. Here's a 3-bedroom apartment that we built in the Panoramic. You can see that too if you happen to come to San Francisco. Notice that we have gotten rid of the living room and dining room, which is a pretty common, actually, trend here in San Francisco, where renters have typically converted living rooms and dining rooms to bedrooms. In this design, we have three bedrooms, one of which is big enough to have 2 single beds, kitchen, bath, foyer, and that's it, 540 square feet. That's what the inside of this unit looks like. As you can see, lots of air, lots of light, tall ceilings, simple design, and very strong or very durable finishes. These are all rentals. An important component of these micro apartments that we're building is to have generous and interesting social spaces. I like to call them sticky social spaces, areas where people will hang out or go to on the ground, typically on the ground floor. In fact, we usually put all of our community spaces on the ground floor. In the Panoramic, which was the high-rise I showed you early, because we had no parking on the ground floor, we were able to liberate more than 3,500 square feet for the public spaces. And there's an area where residents can eat, socialize. We have a piano, fireplace, other things. And in addition to that, we've got beautiful roof decks. We tend to put those on all of our projects. Smarter, and here's the guts, here's the essence of how I think we can go about producing housing in a much more efficient fashion. Before you right now is an image of a balloon frame residential building that was invented in Chicago in 1833, and in the intervening 183 years since the invention of balloon framing, which was a major step forward in construction, we have progressed to this, which as you can see is very similar to the balloon frame structure we had 183 years ago, and I've superimposed the image of Rufus and Zebediah there because I think they would feel quite comfortable on a residential housing construction site once we gave them an introduction to nailing guns. But I'm being facetious here, of course, but it's an indication of just how little progress we've made in the field of construction, which suggests it's crying out for change. And the change that we think shows the most promise, actually, is standardization and modular construction. And here's a project in Scandinavia that uses modular construction. It's a pretty simple operation. Generally speaking, one would build the foundation and all the utilities in the same way that that one would build for a conventional project, but a factory someplace in Sacramento or Idaho or China would build out the modules. We're proposing a new kind of all-steel modular construction that is built in China because it's the only place that builds steel modular. It would be shipped over here and then lifted into place. and put on top of a frame or a post-tension slab. A very important thing that that we're proposing for cities is to allow us to build a post-tension slab over one of their existing parking lots, and then let us build housing for the homeless, housing, affordable housing for families on top of that deck. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. We did our first modular project in 2013 on that site that I showed you earlier that was 3,750 square feet. And in 4 days, we built the 80% of the structure using crane and modular technology. And the finished product, you can see before you right there, and the inside and the outside is indistinguishable from a site-built project, and it's actually far better construction. Here is a modular project that our Director of Development saw and toured in Newcastle this summer. It is a 250-unit project that went from a slab-on grade to that in 8 days. And there's still quite a bit of construction work to be done on the outside, but the total construction time is slashed by about 40 to 50%, and the total construction costs are slashed by about 30%, depending on where one is building. And even though there's a lot of work to be done on the outside, as you can see here, the insides of these units are completely finished. And this is a technology that is widely used throughout the rest of the world. In fact, Holiday Inn, Courtyard Marriott, Hampton Inn, and I think some other American firms have built more than 22,000 of these. These are hotel rooms here, but the technology works for 2-bedroom apartments, 4-bedroom apartments, or micro studios. This is the outside of a prefab project in Brooklyn. As you can see, it's indistinguishable from a conventional one. And there's our prefab project that we did in San Francisco, again, the 38 city spaces at 38 Harriet. What makes Panoramic very excited about steel prefab is its capacity to provide thousands of units in a short period of time. And here is a cargo boat that came through the Golden Gate last December 31st. It's actually called the Benjamin Franklin, but it can carry 19,000 modules, steel container modules, and our steel prefab is not containers, but they do use the same intermodal features, intermodal connections that are standard in ships, trains, and semis. And just a portion of that boat, 26% to be exact, or 24% of the capacity of that boat, would provide all of the dwellings that San Francisco says it needs to provide housing for its 4,400 unhoused homeless. So the productive capacity represented by steel modular is astonishing, and could be calibrated to provide as many or as little as few units as a city wanted or developer wanted. The last feature that I want to emphasize about the importance of producing more housing is standardization. And for this, I found inspiration in everybody's favorite, at least in California, hamburger place, which is In-N-Out Burger. And if those of you that may not know about In-N-Out Burger should know that essentially it has 3 items on the menu. It has the hamburger, the cheeseburger, and the double-double, and that is it. And they do an incredible job. They do it very economically, and the food is excellent. And what Panoramic is proposing now to do is to emulate the In-N-Out Burger model and offer just 3 types of housing. We have our hamburger, which is the micro pad, the studio apartment, the tiny studio apartment that I showed you earlier for homeless housing. We have the cheeseburger, which I showed you, which is the 2-bedroom, 425, or in this case 432 square foot 2-bedroom apartment, and we have the double-double, or the equivalent of the in-and-out double-double, which is a 4-bedroom, 1.5 bath unit that's around 624 square feet. And we think that if cities or states want to provide lots of housing for at the most economical way, they should standardize their designs and build variations of a combination of these 3 items. Again, the micropad, which I just showed you, was our studio. That's the one for 1 or 2 people, which is ideal, we think, for homeless housing. The CHEESEBURGER is the 2-bedroom unit that we actually have a fully functioning one in San Francisco that any of you could come take a look if you want to come stop by our office. Just Google Panoramic Interests. And there's the 2-bedroom unit right there. A key component, by the way, of these tiny units is to have lots of open space that can be divided, closed off. Here we have 2 bedrooms that have 6-foot by 7 tall sliding pocket doors that are glass, that are closed for privacy but open during the day, and make for a significant improvement in the perception of the livability of the space, because essentially the living area is around 16 feet across rather than 8, which is what our standard module is. The tall ceilings, 9-foot ceilings, also helps a lot, as does the very generous glazing in the front of the apartment. And here is our double-double, 4 bedrooms, kitchen, dining room, very modest living room, half bath. And that's what this unit looks like in a model form. And we're going to be building these apartments on a site in Soma in a year and a half. So to summarize, car-free plus micro-DNA plus modular equals more housing. And if the cities would like to build this on their existing property, we can build it over a parking lot or over any other kind of activity and allow whatever parking or other activity to still remain. And that's done by putting a post-tension slab over whatever it is and then stacking our units on the top. California cultivates innovation, and I think it's long overdue that we should be doing it in construction. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Patrick. Now we're going to Darin.
Well, thank you guys, and thank you, Patrick. Patrick gave a great overview talking about trends, talking about things that are impacting us, new technologies, the reduced need for an automobile, especially in more urban areas like San Francisco. And then he also talked about sort of density by design or affordability by design and standardization. I'm going to talk a little bit more about not more urban examples, but some more suburban and smaller community first-ring suburb examples of infill and small units, whether it be tiny homes and cottage courts. And I think the main difference that my talk's going to get into is about what's out there, the trends in the market right now that people are looking for, and a lot to deal with context-sensitive solutions. How do we get infill in our existing residential neighborhoods, both single-family and multifamily? Strategic infill, and I think the term that I'm moving towards is tactical housing. So I'm going to talk, size does matter. Patrick talked about his largest unit being 624 square feet. The projects that I'm talking about max out at 650 square feet for the small, 400 square feet for the extra small, and 100 down to 152 square feet for the extra small units. So to put it in the nomenclature of Daniel Perolik, sort of missing middle housing. How do we get housing? How do we maximize the advantages of underutilized properties within our cities, both very urban and less urban places? And what Patrick talked about is the areas on the far right of this diagram. I'm going to show you examples of cottage courts and things like that that have been in existence for a while, but I think there's some new paradigm shifts for changing with smaller units and tiny homes. And then fitting these types of projects, whether it be backyard cottages or ADUs, into existing single-family neighborhoods and multifamily neighborhoods as well. A little bit of background. I'm a planner. I've been working on, for the last 15 years, sort of streamlining planning and helping to get projects in the ground, whether that be strategic public involvement, or whether that be new finance tools for infrastructure, and now getting into the provision of new housing typologies. I split my time between my little bungalow, which doesn't meet the Patrick's double-double description. It's 900 square feet, and a houseboat, Liberty Dock in Sausalito, where a lot of urbanists and actually the former state architect of California lived, and a lot of people have lived here and defined their theories about planning and small units and small living by living on houseboats. So it's been an interesting trip for the last 3 years. On a side note, it's not only myself talking about my projects, but also I've been working and listening with other people and trying to understand what are the barriers to getting things done, to getting smaller units. And as I said, they've been around for years. This is some old cabins that were up in Lake Tahoe, but today this is highly illegal. So not only is it illegal, but the fee structure really precludes doing small units. So the fees for each of these small cabins is the exact same fee structure that you would pay for a 4,000 square foot house. One of the reasons why we got interested in this is we have a tool called infillscore that we launched last year, and only about 16% of cities have a tiered impact fee system, and really that's not good enough. We're not going to get the housing types that Patrick talked about and that I'm going to show you in the ground unless we change that fee structure. Another exciting project that we were involved in with the Discovery Channel and Tree Hugger was we helped to crowdsource the design of a micro unit in New York City in Soho with Graham Hill. He's actually built 2 of these. There were a total of 300 submissions. It was an international design competition, 300 submissions from 80 countries. They chose the winning entry, a fellow from Romania, and he's helped to build and furnish out this unit. You might have seen it on a TED Talk, with moving walls, very efficient use of space, and very exciting. I've been sort of playing around with this idea and how do you frame housing and this idea of maybe tactical housing. We can't wait through the typical process to get through planning, entitlement, in California, CEQA or NEPA, and get housing built. Some of the most recent projects we've worked on as a team, as a planning firm and design firm, have taken over 10 years to get entitled in California, and that's not going to help us solve the housing crisis. So I really want to look at some of the innovations that people like Tim McCormick are doing with HouseLet, basically looking at the combination of micro homes and parklets, and how can we be creative with space and create something like a HouseLet. That would probably be more of a temporary type of housing situation, as opposed to something that's more permanent, that goes through a government process and that's that's approved. Something that's in the middle in terms of tactical housing might be something like what folks are using in rural areas. They're taking out 1- and 2-year permits for a caretaker's unit to have a tiny home in their backyard, and that's how they're able to do it legally. It's not permanent, it's not really temporary, they just have to apply every couple of years. So our job is to take a lot of this energy around tiny homes that's unsanctioned and illegal and move it into becoming more sanctioned and legal, and we're going to talk about a variety of legal pathways for tiny homes. So this is just a quote from from Jeff, who's working on building a tiny home village for affordable housing, and just frustrated, just that cities and municipalities don't know what to do with tiny homes as a potential solution. Not only is it the parking regulations, it's the zoning codes and also the building codes that are kind of getting in the way. And some people are just going out there and building projects anyway. If you look on the web or on Craigslist and search for tiny homes, every day you'll see a few of them that are for sale, and it says must be moved by a certain date because they've either been condemned or somebody, a neighbor, cried out against a project that didn't go through proper channels and wasn't legitimately approved. A really good book, it's fascinating, Andrew Heben wrote, called Tent City Urbanism, really talks about this idea of self-organizing tiny house villages for the homeless and giving them a hand up and a step up. And there's a variety of ways of doing that. There's also this idea of downsizing, and there's, as Patrick mentioned with the trends, there's more and more people, single person households, people choosing to live a smaller, choosing to travel more, choosing a life of experiences, and going from this 2,500 plus square foot house down to something in the neighborhood of 600 square feet or less. So there's a lot of people not only looking to get out of their current situation and find a home or temporary situation, but find transitional housing, put ADUs or granny flats in their backyard, or have some kind of vacation rental or type of retreat that they can use for additional income to subsidize their mortgage. Some real fascinating trends. Tiny House Big Living is the #1 rated show on HGTV. I'm sure a lot of you might have been watching some of these shows. But what's also interesting is if you look at it, the trends for the term tiny house has gone through the roof just in the last 18 months. And to juxtapose that, the search for building code has gone down dramatically over the same point in time. Hopefully we can learn to build these tiny homes to be consistent with and to meet the requirements of the building code. This is some really interesting research. This is a little bit dated, but it's by Eco Building Pulse. And they look at a variety of states and how friendly they are towards tiny homes. I think what's really interesting is only Oregon right now, or this is a year ago, it was really towns are specifically working on a variety of solutions. California has more builders than a lot of the other communities. And there's a lot of RV parks being converted to tiny home communities as well, and some traditional tiny home communities. Right now, our estimates are there's 40 tiny home villages currently in progress and in discussion or in planning throughout the United States. There's also some really good research out there from UC Berkeley on the benefits of tiny home villages to give people a hand up and how cost effective they are and how successful they are in providing a long-term solution. I'm not going to talk about glamping or converting RV parks. I'm really interested in infill and the use of tiny homes for infill situations. So our firm, we have a track record of creating public-private partnerships. This is a rail yard project up in Truckee, also using a community-based design approach. Infilling in existing neighborhoods is highly controversial. We need to be very careful and involve the public and the neighbors and stakeholders in that process. We've developed charrette tools and something called the density game that can help to educate people about the benefits of density done well. We have tools called infillscore and an infill roadmap tool used by 230 cities. And then we're also have our hands in some development projects as well and infrastructure finance tools. Our infill score, the top city in our infill score tool last year was San Antonio, Texas. This is the mayor accepting their award for large city. They're really taking action. They also directed their building department to work with the local Construction Careers Academy to inspect 4 tiny homes, 152 square feet. They went through 96 inspections over the course of the last year and actually granted them a certificate of occupancy. But there's one hiccup with the zoning bylaw, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. So infill score, it's just a tool to assess the infill readiness and what cities are doing to set themselves up to be infill ready. And a lot of this gets into how are we removing the barriers and obstacles for affordable housing, and are we fast tracking the delivery of that housing? So this is from a few months ago. But really, you know, what are the top challenges of the cities in the infill score tool? It's really about getting public support for density and density done well and designing projects that fit in the character of the existing neighborhoods. Then it's about infrastructure, then streamlining, and then fees, as I mentioned before. And then it's embedded in here is parking that Patrick talked about as well. This is San Antonio's infill score worksheet. They scored 70 out of 100. Most of our cities are getting a failing grade. the average score on our infill score tool is actually 44 out of 100. We need to do much better. We need to be removing barriers across the board for innovative housing types, not just project by project by project. San Antonio used our infill roadmap tool, and of 197 potential actions, they decided to prioritize key development, redevelopment locations to work on their density bonuses in TOD locations and to adopt more flexible codes. So being involved in San Antonio and having given them the Infill Award, we heard about this interesting project where the local Careers Academy built some tiny homes, a bungalow court basically, and they were auctioning them off for charity. Our team went down. There were 3,500 people that went to the parade of homes. It got a lot of media attention. And we ended up, there was a lot of interest, but the people that live in the area in Texas live in very large homes. And there seemed to be a bigger market for this type of product in urban areas in California or other communities. So we ended up buying all of the units. And we're currently looking for municipal partners to bring these 4 units back as a demonstration project and to create a sort of a 14 to 24 unit bungalow court, cottage court with tiny homes. This is an example or images of some of the units. There are a variety of folks out there, as I mentioned, working on tiny home communities. This is one that's in Colorado. It's in Walsenburg, and this is a group called Sprout Tiny Homes. This is their second project they're working on. It involves 500 square foot units paired with 200 square foot accessory dwelling units. And then they can also pair them up to create duplexes as well for larger units. There's some common amenity areas and things like that. One of our fears as a planning firm as well is that we don't want these tiny home villages to look like trailer parks over time. We need to think about the streetscape, the design, the articulation, the building frontages, and things like that to be successful. There are some really good examples that have been built in the past. Bruce Tollard created a Garden Grove, created a 1 acre project of 14 Katrina cottages. It's been very successful. Also, Ross Chapin has developed a number of projects or pocket neighborhoods and wrote the book Pocket Neighborhoods. We're trying to emulate these kinds of designs and improve upon them with some smaller units and variety of unit types. This is another example of what we think is a great plan for a bungalow court with some smaller units and accessory dwelling units at the back. Kind of thinking of it as co-housing light, if you will. So why did we go to San Antonio and buy, all the way to San Antonio from California, and buy tiny homes? Because they went through 96 inspections, structural, electrical, plumbing, health and safety, and they were granted a certificate of occupancy from the chief building official. The challenge we face is they're still illegal under the San Antonio zoning bylaw that has a minimum 300 square foot unit size, so they actually have to be relocated outside of the city limits. This is evident in the governing article, that a post that came out last week on tiny homes, affordable, energy efficient, and often illegal. I think we need to work together to remove those barriers. So our goal is to have, now this architecture may change depending on the location, but it's to pair small cottages, 600 square feet, with tiny homes as an ADU, potentially with tiny homes on wheels as a guest suite. These tiny homes are so over-designed to meet the building code. They have 200 amp electrical panels, and that's enough to actually power a tiny home on wheels parked beside it. This provides ultimate flexibility in terms of family unit, rental income, and affordability all in one. So what we're looking for, this is a little site plan on the left of our little courtyard. This is phase 1 of a larger project. We're looking for local government partners or communities that would have property from a ½ acre to 2 acres to do up to a 24 unit project, has to have urban services, multifamily zoning, or a city that's going to work with us on the zoning, room to grow and expand, and good solar access. So what's the legal path for tiny homes and cottage courts? Well, I just want to make it very clear, I'm not talking about tiny homes on wheels per se. Tiny homes on wheels are registered under the Recreational Vehicle Industry Association. There's different means to do that. There's a brand new group called the American Tiny House Association that's just getting started. We're going to be working with them on defining these new legal pathways. There are examples in Fresno with a tiny house on wheels ordinance, in Sonoma County, tiny home demonstration ordinance that Andrew Heben has developed, the original cottage company ordinance developed by Ross Chapin. What we're excited about is something very simple called the dwelling unit equivalency ordinance. And basically this says that 250 square foot units equals 1 unit for the purposes of density, parking, and fees. And 2 650 square foot units equals 1 unit for the purpose of density, parking, and fees. And then the third line basically says which zones it applies to. Very simple, could be adopted as an overlay zone citywide and help to implement these projects in a very timely way. And with that, I want to see if we have any time for questions.
Great, thanks, Darin. Yeah, we have a lot of questions that have come in. If you are participating in our webinar, you can enter your question in the questions panel and the control panel, and we have a bunch that have already come in. I think, Patrick, this question came in from Sue Liebeck when you were presenting, so this one's for you. She's asking, since buildings are long-term assets, the use of space will change over time. Is there an easy to convert capability principle at play here? In particular, the trend towards converting living rooms into an extra bedroom can be expected to change over time as demographics change, preferences, usage patterns change, and the tenant profile that uses it changes. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, our units actually don't have built-in closets in them, so the spaces there can be configured as a den, an office, a living room, a media room, or whatever. We're trying to provide this space, basically provide the space, but not necessarily the furniture, fixture, and equipment in that space. So there is flexibility there. The homes that we're producing, or we're proposing, though, are made of 3/8 inch steel on the walls there, and they are not something that is easy to modify downstream, however.
Great. And then second question for you, Patrick. Can you adjust the cost per unit and per square foot? Is the modular model only relative along the coast or versus inland?
I think its biggest attractions are on the coast. The cost of labor inland is 1/3 of what it is here in the coastal cities. But I think once more modular is adopted on the coast, it will migrate inland because it will become more competitive.
Great. Thanks for that. Darin, we have a few questions for you. Where would someone find the language for dwelling unit equivalent fee ordinance information?
Yeah, we've got a little splash webpage, buildbright.com, and if they just sign up there and put in the note that they want the ordinance, we can send that out to people.
Great. And Darin, do you have any examples of tiny homes in Canada that you've seen?
Yeah, it's a growing movement, actually. The BC Housing is looking at doing a pilot project. There's also a group in Ontario that's working on one as well. I was actually just up there visiting my family farm, actually, in the Great Lakes, and talking to my relatives about this idea. And really, I think in the Canadian climate, doing a freestanding 150 square foot unit isn't going to cut it in the winter. So probably something, in the neighborhood of 300 to 500 square feet.
Yeah, you just have to stay inside a lot more. That's a good point. Patrick, this is a question from me, actually. I was hoping you could touch really briefly on the new legislation Governor Brown is considering the state of California that might change all of this.
Yes, I mean, part of the problem in California is the lengthy and expensive entitlements process, whereby any neighbor can object to a project and gum it up for years on time at a time. Governor Brown recently has proposed legislation that would allow projects that meet existing zoning in a city and which set aside a certain percentage for affordable housing to be approved as of right without the opportunity for neighbors, labor unions, and others to object to the project. And so it would be a major benefit to those trying to build housing, but it would also be a major threat to those that have been able to stop housing to promote whatever agenda they have. I mean, we found organized labor does not like I-right because it would limit the amount of ability they would have to protest projects. Environmentalists don't like it because some projects would have no CEQA review, and they're objecting to it. But California's housing shortage is directly attributable to the difficult and expensive entitlements process, and
right.
that's going to be that's being debated right now at the legislature.
Great, thanks for that little policy update. Patrick, there's a question around the affordability of micropads and who's funding your projects, the micropad projects for the homeless?
Oh, well, we're prepared to build them for the city, but in San Francisco, we're also prepared to build them and lease them to the city for $1,000 a month, which is probably 40% below market. If the city were to give us a parking lot, we would build the building for free, lease it to them for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and give them an option to buy it. The units would also be furnished. The cities would provide the services and the property management, however. We would just provide the dwellings.
Great. So right now you guys are looking to partner with a city that's willing to do this?
Yes, we're looking at that, or if we find a site, we're looking to build. We're building. We would build it ourselves. We have 3 other conventional projects in various stages right now, but the urgency of the homeless housing or the homeless situation in California has refocused our attention on providing some kind of viable solution for homeless housing, and we're out looking for sites. So if cities or churches have sites that would be suitable for this sort of thing, we would love to talk to them.
Great, good to know. Nancy Frank has a question. I think, Darin, this one's for you. How do you overcome the added expense of infill cottages being required to have their own water service line and sewer lateral? This cost is preventing infill with small units in the rear or side lot here in Milwaukee. That's from Nancy Frank.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some jurisdictions will allow you to tier off the existing services if you have a reciprocal easement on the property or have ever had one registered. So that might be a way to get around it. The other way to get around it is to look at the fees and actually request that the jurisdiction reduce the fees, either have a tiered impact fee based on the size of the unit or the square footage of the unit, or defer the fee. And the cities, I think Chula Vista just did that in California, where they're deferring the fees for 30 years over time so that they can get the housing they need in a cost-effective way in the ground.
Gotcha. And Darin, maybe you can touch on this first, and then Patrick. Do you guys have any thoughts around controlling the use of small homes for being used for vacation rentals as opposed to, stable long-term housing? Darin first.
Darin, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll go first. So we're trying to do this more in a free market than the affordable housing industrial complex allows currently. And what we would like to do is work with cities that are gateway cities or resort cities that have challenges with their affordability where we could use vacation rentals to actually subsidize the local workforce housing without having to ask it from the government. So the idea is kind of like Tom's shoes. When you buy a pair of shoes at Tom's Shoes, a pair gets donated to Africa. The vacation rentals, people would be made aware and know that what they're paying for that vacation rental is going to subsidize the workforce housing.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Patrick, thoughts?
Yeah, I think the benefits of providing more accessory dwellings like this vastly outweighs the downside of having vacation rentals, which in and of itself actually might be a good thing because it would take pressure off existing housing going on Airbnb. So I think anything that produces more housing in prime locations close to transit is always a good thing.
Good. And yeah, there was a transit question regarding, Patrick, if you want to comment on that. How do we keep up the enough transit to support housing without parking?
I think it's it is a chicken and the egg dilemma. But if you're in central cities where people can walk and ride bikes to work, I think the transit will follow. And part of our focus is to put these on existing underutilized lots that are in the center of the cities. So transit's there. And we're not proposing doing these in areas that are underserved by transit, but rather in areas that already are transit rich.
Right. Okay. Good. And I just want to mention, a few people have had questions about slides. If you go to your handouts panel on the right, both Patrick and Darin's slides are available in PDF form there, as well as we have them on our website, cityminded.org. I'm going to take one or two more questions and then we'll wrap up. But Darin, this is for you. You didn't mention this, but the best, this is from Ann Deigel, the best, most effective, cost-effective solution in the suburbs might be the redevelopment of existing suburban tract houses into multifamily residences. Once legalized by zoning, do you have any ideas about new legal routes for subdivision, mortgage financing, and insurance? Any thoughts about that, Darin?
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the bill offhand, but Lily Pad Homes is working on statewide legislation in California for junior suites, and I think that's moving along well, and that's going to have a huge impact. They've been successful in Nevada and a few other jurisdictions in getting that passed, so I think that would have a lot to do with it. In terms of the mortgage financing, I will say this. I've been talking to mortgage lenders, and on these small units and micro units, I'm not talking about Patrick's type of units, but on these tiny home type units, it is a challenge in Canada to get a mortgage for anything under 800 square feet. In the US, it's $685. So we're looking at working with different lenders to put together innovative finance packages for tiny homes.
Great. Patrick, any thoughts about that, mortgage financing or redeveloping suburban tract homes?
Well, we've had no problem finding financing for our micro apartments, largely because they're either residential hotels or apartment buildings that just happen to be quite small. And the track record of small apartments, new small apartments in San Francisco is good, and so lenders are not spooked at the idea of lending on it because they see that the building typology is successful, at least here in the city.
Great. Yeah, I'm wondering what that must be like in other cities around the country, but we can get to that in another webinar, perhaps.
Right.
I don't think we have time for any more questions, but if you want to get in touch with Darin or Patrick, you can visit Patrick's website, panoramicinterests.com. Is that right, Patrick?
It's actually just panoramic.com.
Panoramic.com. And Darin, your website or email is?
Yeah, Darin@buildbright.com.
Great. I want to just thank everybody for coming, and a survey will pop up when you close your browser. Darin, Patrick, thanks so much for today, and we will be discussing continuing the conversation around housing first policy, infrastructure, PPPs at Meeting of the Minds 2016, which is our annual summit being held October 25th to 27th here in the Bay Area. You can find more information on that at cityminded.org. We will post the slides on our event page, webinar event page at cityminded.org. If you click on calendar, you'll find the webinar event page there. And I just want to thank everybody for your time. And thanks so much, Darin and Patrick. Great stuff.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.